The morning of June 6, 1944, dawned over the Normandy coast, cold and gray. Thousands of Allied soldiers, soaked and seasick from the Channel crossing, braced themselves to storm Hitler's Atlantic Wall. But beneath the sandy shores and rugged terrain lay a far more sinister threat than just concrete bunkers or machine gun nests. Millions of buried mines, each capable of tearing a man apart or turning a tank into a blazing inferno. Within hours of Operation Overlord, American forces at Omaha Beach would discover just how deadly these hidden threats could be. Entire platoons vanished in eruptions of sand and steel. Engineers, crawling forward with bayonets and prodding sticks, were gunned down by German riflemen before they could even clear a single meter. The mounting casualty figures painted a grim picture that would haunt Allied commanders for months. Yet, as American troops struggled through this nightmare, something extraordinary was taking place further east along the British and Canadian landing zones. At Gold, Juno, and Sword beaches, the casualties from mines remained remarkably low, not by chance, but through innovation. Ahead of the infantry, tanks with enormous rotating drums, armored vehicles carrying massive reels of fabric, and Churchill tanks fitted with flamethrowers and mortar-like weapons rolled ashore. To the surprised German defenders, these strange contraptions must have seemed comical, but there was nothing funny about their effectiveness. These were Hobart's Funnies, designed specifically to clear mines at a rate previously thought impossible. The origin of these unusual machines can be traced back to Britain's darkest days. By 1940, Britain stood alone against Nazi tyranny. France had fallen in a disastrous six-week campaign that exposed major weaknesses in Allied armored doctrine. British tanks had proved inadequate, tactics were outdated, and leadership was lacking. Among those blamed for the failure was Major-General Percy Hobart, a difficult and often abrasive man who had long advocated for radical changes in tank design and deployment, ideas that had earned him forced retirement. By 1940, this brilliant but troublesome officer found himself in the Home Guard, serving as a humble corporal, directing traffic, and training civilians to fight with broomsticks if the Germans invaded. But Winston Churchill, unlike other military leaders, recognized that the war would be won by those who thought differently, those who saw possibilities where others saw obstacles. Churchill, alarmed by repeated failures of conventional approaches, needed innovators, risk-takers, and people willing to try the impossible. When he learned that Hobart, one of Britain's most creative armored warfare theorists, was sidelined, Churchill acted swiftly. Despite protests from senior officers who considered Hobart a threat, Churchill personally ordered his return to active duty. The instructions were clear: prepare Britain's armored forces for the eventual invasion of occupied Europe. Do whatever it takes. Ignore the skeptics. Hobart threw himself into the task with fierce energy. He quickly realized that the upcoming invasion would present unique challenges, particularly the threat of mines along the European beaches. Intelligence reports revealed that the Germans had planted over 6 million mines along the Atlantic Wall, with densities reaching 15 devices per meter in some sectors. Traditional mine clearance methods, where engineers crawled forward under fire, prodding the ground with bayonets and removing each mine by hand, would take days and cost countless lives. The invasion would fail before it even began. Hobart knew the solution lay in mechanization, but not just bigger or better tanks. He needed entirely new types of vehicles, each designed to solve a specific problem. The obstacles were diverse: mines, barbed wire, concrete walls, anti-tank ditches, beach obstacles, mud, and fortified positions. Each required a specialized solution, not the standardized approach that military thinking favored. Hobart envisioned a menagerie of odd machines, each designed for its specific task. His superiors thought him mad, and his engineering teams doubted whether devices would work. But Hobart had something rare in military circles: unshakable confidence in his vision and the political backing to make it a reality. By 1943, Hobart had earned a reputation as a visionary, albeit a difficult one. Born in 1885, Hobart had spent decades developing innovative armored warfare theories that most of his peers found either incomprehensible or threatening. In the 1930s, while other officers indulged in leisure, Hobart tirelessly experimented with tank formations, communications, and tactics, building the famous Desert Rats and pushing his crews to their limits. Despite his successes, his abrasive personality alienated many, and he was eventually removed from command in 1939. But when Hobart's theories were validated by German tactics in France, his vindication was bitter. Fortunately, Churchill's intervention in 1940 gave Hobart a second chance. Now, with the authority to revolutionize Britain's armored forces, Hobart set about transforming the 79th Armored Division into an elite formation specializing in special devices, the very machines that would clear the beaches and ensure the success of the invasion. Hobart's task was to create an entirely new approach to armored warfare. The 79th Armored Division became Hobart's testing ground. Unlike standard divisions designed for frontline combat, this one existed solely to address specific tactical challenges through engineering innovation. Hobart assembled teams of engineers, tank crews, and weapons specialists, giving them a clear mission: identify every obstacle the invasion force would face and design a machine to overcome it. The mine problem was the most pressing. German beach defenses relied heavily on S-mines, deadly devices known as bouncing Bettys that would leap waist-high before exploding, and tail mines, which were capable of destroying tanks. Intelligence reports revealed that the Germans had laid these mines in overlapping patterns, sometimes in multiple layers to thwart conventional clearance techniques. Any solution needed to work under fire, move faster than a man could walk, and withstand multiple detonations. Hobart's engineers drew inspiration from South African mine clearance operations in the Western Desert. There, engineers had tried attaching rotating drums with chains to the front of Matilda tanks. The chains whipped against the ground, detonating mines ahead of the vehicle. The early prototypes were rudimentary. The chains frequently snapped, the drums jammed, and the modifications caused the tanks to become dangerously unbalanced. But the core idea was sound. Hobart tasked his teams with refining the concept, improving the engineering, and adapting it to the American Sherman tanks, which would form the backbone of the British armored forces for the invasion. The result was a Sherman Crab, a machine that would prove essential on D-Day. The Crab retained its primary armament and could still fight as a conventional tank, but it featured a rotating drum nearly 3 meters wide mounted at the front. Powered by a separate engine, the drum spun at 140 revolutions per minute, causing chains to thrash the ground, detonating pressure-sensitive mines while the tank remained safely behind. The Crab could clear a 3-meter-wide path at walking speed, a pace slower than preferred but far faster than manual clearance. Each Crab carried enough fuel to clear about 4 kilometers of minefield. The sound it produced was deafening, a mechanical roar punctuated by the sharp crack of detonating mines. German defenders quickly came to fear this distinctive noise. But Hobart's innovation didn't stop with mines. Beaches might be too soft for tanks, so he created a vehicle designed to lay reinforcing matting. Concrete seawall could impede progress, so he designed tanks capable of bridging or breaching them. Pillboxes and bunkers might withstand conventional shells, so Hobart created weapons specifically designed to destroy the fortifications at close range. Hobart's division grew into a bizarre collection of modified vehicles, each designed for a specific task. The Sherman Crab was a culmination of years of trial and error. Early prototypes had been failures. Chains broke under stress, drums bent, engines lacked the power to spin the drums, and the tanks became unbalanced. Engineers worked tirelessly to improve the design, experimenting with different chain lengths, link designs, and drum speeds. They also tested various metals, finding that hardened steel chains lasted longest but required enormous power to operate effectively. Ultimately, they mounted a Bedford engine taken from a lorry to power the flail mechanism, leaving the Sherman's primary engine free for propulsion. This solution added weight and complexity, but it worked. By late 1943, production Crabs were rolling out of workshops across Britain. Each machine required extensive modifications to a standard Sherman tank. The bow machine gun was removed to make room for hydraulic systems that raised and lowered the flail drum. The front hull was reinforced to withstand the stresses caused by the rotating drum. Metal arms were extended forward from the tank to support the drum, and absorbed the violent shaking when the chain struck the mines. The entire apparatus added over 2 tons to the tank's weight, but careful engineering allowed the tank to remain mobile. Specialized training was necessary to operate the Crab. Crews had to coordinate between the driver, commander, and operator controlling the flail mechanism. A mistake could cause a tank to hit an UN-cleared mine or get the flail tangled in obstacles. Training revealed unexpected complications. The flail created dust clouds that obscured vision, forcing crews to navigate by dead reckoning. The noise of the flail made radio communication nearly impossible, so crews developed hand signals and prearranged procedures. Chain breakages remained common, and each crab carried spare chains, requiring crews to replace them under fire, a dangerous task that involved dismounting while surrounded by live mines. The violence of detonating mines often damaged the tracks and suspension, and occasionally the hull would suffer broken welds. Engineers strengthened vulnerable points, but crabs remained fragile compared to standard Shermans. Hobart accepted these limitations. The crabs didn't need to be perfect. They just needed to be effective enough to get the infantry across the beaches alive. Tactics evolved through constant practice. Crabs advanced in echelon formations, each clearing a parallel lane through the minefields. Supporting Shermans, armed with functional guns, would provide cover while the crabs worked. If one crab was disabled, another would move up to continue clearing. Speed was deliberately kept slow. Rushing could cause mines to be missed or chains to snap. The methodical pace frustrated commanders eager for rapid advances, but Hobart emphasized thoroughness over speed. A lane cleared at 2 miles per hour was far more valuable than a hasty advance that left the infantry stranded in a minefield. The crab wasn't Hobart's only answer to the mine problem. His teams developed other complementary systems, each with unique strengths. The Canadian CRD, conventional roller device, featured enormous steel wheels pushed ahead of a tank. These wheels were designed to trigger mines, absorbing the blast that would destroy regular vehicles. Though the wheels were expendable, they protected the tank and crew. CRDs were effective in light minefields but struggled in deep sand and couldn't maintain the pace required for assault operations. They were best suited for follow-up operations once the beachheads were secured. Another innovation was the Conga, a trailer-mounted rocket carrying an explosive hose across a minefield. Once detonated, the hose cleared a narrow path by triggering sympathetic detonations. The Conga was advantageous because it operated from a safe distance. Crews could fire the rocket from behind cover and then advance through the cleared path. However, it was single-use, difficult to reload, and the paths it cleared were narrow and hazardous. Hobart classified the Conga as specialist equipment for particularly difficult obstacles, not as a general-purpose tool. It was employed against dense minefields or in situations where sending a crab would be too dangerous. Field trials in 1943 and early 1944 refined the tactics and proved the crab's capabilities. During one exercise on the Norfolk coast, a single crab cleared a 300-meter stretch of practice mines in under 15 minutes, work that would have taken hours with a platoon of engineers and likely resulted in numerous casualties. Another test demonstrated that crab could operate at night using coordinated navigation techniques. Hobart's crews grew more confident, but he knew the true test would come on D-Day. There, the crabs would face live mines and artillery fire, and failure would cost thousands of lives. By May 1944, the 79th Armored Division had over 300 operational crabs, with more rolling out each week. Crews trained tirelessly, often working 12-hour days to master the procedures. Hobart personally oversaw the exercises, identifying weaknesses and demanding improvements. He understood that these odd machines were the difference between success and disaster on D-Day. Intelligence suggested that German beach defenses included up to 15 mines per meter in some areas, and traditional clearance methods would fail. The crabs had to work. There was no other option. While the crabs tackled mines, Hobart's engineers worked on solutions for every other obstacle on the beach. The Churchill AVREs armored vehicle, used by the Royal Engineers, became the backbone of the specialized fleet. Based on the heavy Churchill tank, the AVRE was equipped with a massive 290mm petard mortar, capable of firing high explosive charges to demolish concrete fortifications. Although its range was limited to just 80 meters, the weapon was devastating when used at point-blank range, able to collapse reinforced concrete and seal gun ports or simply kill the occupants through overpressure. The AVRE, like the Crab, was an essential component in the Allied assault, clearing the way for infantry and armor to advance. Handling the heavy projectile was perilous, but far safer than attempting to destroy bunkers with conventional weapons. The AVRE's versatility went beyond its primary weapon. Engineers outfitted these tanks with a variety of attachments, turning them into mobile problem solvers. The small box girder bridge enabled the AVRE to cross anti-tank ditches or cratered areas. The tank carried the bridge sections folded flat and could raise and position them under fire. Once in place, following vehicles could pass while the AVRE moved forward to tackle the next obstacle. Another modification, the fascina, was made up of massive bundles of wooden logs bound tightly together. These bundles were carried by the AVRE and dropped into ditches to create instant crossings. Each fascina weighed nearly 2 tons and needed careful placement, but it allowed tanks to cross barriers that would otherwise halt and advance completely. The bobbin attachment was designed to address a challenge unique to Normandy's beaches, soft sand and shingle that would bog down heavily loaded vehicles. Engineers mounted large spools of reinforced coconut matting on AVRE chassis, transforming them into mobile road layers. As the bobbin advanced, it unrolled the matting behind it, creating a temporary roadway that kept following vehicles from sinking. The concept was simple, like laying carpet across a beach, but required precise engineering to ensure smooth deployment under combat conditions. Trials showed that a single bobbin could lay over 100 meters of matting before exhausting its spool, enough to get vehicles off the sand and onto firmer ground. The matting, made from coconut fiber and reinforced with steel wire, could support vehicles up to 40 tons. Perhaps the most fearsome of Hobart's creations was the Churchill Crocodile, a flamethrower tank of extraordinary power. The Crocodile towed an armored trailer carrying 400 gallons of fuel gel connected to a flame projector that replaced the tank's hull machine gun. Under pressure from nitrogen cylinders, the projector could hurl a jet of burning gel over 100 meters. The psychological effect was immense. German troops, who had withstood artillery bombardments and tank fire, often broke and fled when confronted with liquid fire. The Crocodile kept its turret gun, making it a fully functional battle tank even after exhausting its flame fuel. The towed trailer was designed with a quick-release coupling, enabling crews to detach it when mobility became critical. By the end of production, around 800 Crocodiles were built, and they proved devastatingly effective against fortified positions throughout the Northwest Europe campaign. Other specialized vehicles filled particular roles. The Canal Defense Light Tank mounted a powerful searchlight and optical systems to project dazzling beams to blind enemy positions or illuminate night operations. The armored ram carrier could position ramps against seawalls, allowing tanks to scale obstacles up to 4 meters high. The double onion demolition charge system fired linked explosive charges through wire obstacles before detonation. Each device solved a specific problem, and Hobart's genius was in recognizing that no single machine could tackle every challenge. The 79th Armored Division needed an entire toolkit, and Hobart was determined to provide it. American military observers viewed Hobart's developments with skepticism. General Omar Bradley, commanding U.S. ground forces for the invasion, considered these specialized vehicles unnecessary complications. American doctrine focused on standardization, mass production, and overwhelming firepower from conventional weapons. Bradley's staff calculated that sufficient artillery preparation and naval gunfire would suppress defenses, enabling infantry and standard tanks to advance without the need for exotic machinery. They particularly objected to the maintenance burden. Each specialized vehicle required unique spare parts, trained crews, and specific tactical deployment. The Americans accepted only 32 DD amphib-based tanks for Omaha Beach, rejecting most of Hobart's innovations. This decision would prove fatal at Omaha Beach. In contrast, British and Canadian forces integrated Hobart's Funnies into their assault plans from the outset. Each brigade received attachment from the 79th Armored Division, and detailed coordination was established during months of rehearsals. Infantry commanders practiced working with crab operators. Artillery officers timed bombardments to allow AVREs to approach bunkers, and beachmasters coordinated traffic plans to ensure that bobbins laid matting while crabs cleared mines. The complexity was immense, but Hobart's staff conducted endless exercises until procedures became second nature. By June 1944, British and Canadian assault forces were ready for the most technically sophisticated amphibious operation in history. On the morning of June 6, 1944, Hobart specialized vehicles were loaded aboard landing craft, crossing rough seas toward the Normandy coast. Months of preparation were about to be tested in the most high-stakes situation imaginable. British forces were tasked with assaulting Gold and Sword beaches, Canadians would take Juneau, and Americans would storm Utah and Omaha. The arrangements reflected stark differences in approach. British and Canadian landing craft carried crabs, AVREs, crocodiles, and bobbins in coordinated waves, while American vessels contained mostly standard Shermans and infantry. General Bradley had agreed to deploy only 32 DD amphibious tanks at Omaha, rejecting Hobart's mine clearance and obstacle-breaching tools. The contrasting casualty figures would soon prove whether this decision was right or wrong. At Gold Beach, the first crabs hit the sand at 7 a.m., immediately beginning their methodical advance through minefields that German engineers had spent months perfecting. The distinctive roar of the rotating chains signaled their arrival, followed by the sharp crack of detonating mines. German defenders, already stunned by naval bombardment, found themselves confronting machines they had never seen before. Coastal artillery fired at the advancing crabs, but the tank's armor was sufficient to withstand all but direct hits from heavy guns. Infantry following in the cleared lanes suffered remarkably light casualties from mines, exactly as Hobart had predicted. When mines did claim victims, they were typically soldiers who strayed outside the marked lanes, ignoring orders to stay within the cleared paths. Sergeant Jim Holman of the Westminster Dragoons commanded a crab in the first wave at Gold. His account, recorded years later, vividly captured the chaos and effectiveness of the operation. As soon as the ramp dropped, the tank's flail began thrashing, chains immediately striking mines that detonated violently. The explosion rattled the vehicle, while a dust cloud from pulverized sand reduced visibility to mere meters. Holman navigated using his compass, maintaining a steady speed while his operator kept the flail running. The crab cleared over 200 meters before it broke through the minefield and onto solid ground. Mission accomplished. Similar scenes played out across the British beaches. At Sword Beach, Major William Dunn commanded a squadron of AVREs tasked with demolishing a massive concrete bunker that dominated the shoreline. His tanks advanced through lanes cleared by crabs, then deployed their explosive charges to neutralize the fortifications. The efficiency and effectiveness of Hobart's specialized vehicles would prove crucial to the success of D-Day. Moving into firing positions barely 60 meters from their target, the Pattard mortars began firing, with each flying dustbin striking with immense force. The first round shattered observation slits. The second collapsed part of the roof, and the third completely penetrated the structure. The bunker ceased firing within minutes, neutralized by weapons designed specifically for such work. Conventional tank guns would have needed dozens of rounds at longer ranges with uncertain results. The Pattard's enormous charge made quick work of fortifications that would otherwise have delayed the advance for hours. Canadian forces at Juno Beach faced particularly challenging conditions. Rocky obstacles beneath the waterline and a seawall blocking vehicle access created significant issues. Bobbins were deployed first, laying matting across shingle that would have trapped wheeled vehicles. AVREs followed, with some dropping Facina bundles into gaps between obstacles, while others positioned small box girder bridges against the seawall. Coordination was far from perfect. Several bobbins became stuck, and one AVRE's bridge jammed during deployment. German fire remained intense, but the overall effect was transformational. Within 90 minutes of landing, Canadians had established multiple vehicle routes off the beach, allowing armor and transport to move inland. While the butcher's bill wasn't light, it was dramatically lower than it would have been without Hobart's inventions. The contrast at Omaha Beach proved heartbreaking. American forces, lacking specialized mine clearance vehicles and assault engineering equipment, encountered the full horror of German beach defenses. 27 of the 32 DD tanks sank in rough seas, never reaching shore. Engineers attempting to clear mines and obstacles by hand were cut down by machine gun fire. Infantry were pinned against the seawall, unable to advance through the minefields without clearance support. Naval destroyers moved dangerously close to shore, providing direct fire support that slowly suppressed German positions. American bravery eventually secured the beach, but at a terrible cost, over 2,000 casualties in a single morning. Bradley's staff officers, watching the carnage, began to reconsider their rejection of British assault engineering methods. The statistical evidence was undeniable. At Gold Beach, British forces suffered around 400 casualties. Tragic, but sustainable. At Juno, Canadians faced roughly 1,000 casualties despite stronger defenses than at Gold. Sword Beach cost another 600 British casualties. These figures, while significant, reflected success by amphibious assault standards. Omaha's 2,000+ casualties from roughly the same number of troops told a different story. Post-battle analysis identified multiple factors. Omaha faced better positioned defenses, rougher seas complicated the landing, and tactical mistakes compounded the difficulties. However, the absence of mine clearance, flails, and specialized assault vehicles was consistently cited as a critical disadvantage. Infantry cannot advance through minefield without either accepting horrific casualties or receiving mechanical assistance. The Americans had attempted the former, while the British employed the latter. The mine casualty statistics from D-Day highlighted the extraordinary effectiveness of Hobart's methods. British military analysts, conducting post-operation assessments, calculated that mine-related casualties at Gold and Sword beaches were approximately 10% of pre-invasion estimates. This 90% reduction seemed almost impossible until examination of the evidence confirmed it. The Crabs had performed exactly as designed, clearing lanes quickly enough to maintain momentum while protecting the infantry behind them. Medical officers noted that mine injuries, typically the most severe battlefield wounds, represented an unusually small proportion of British casualties. Where mines did kill or maim, investigations revealed that soldiers had breached discipline, either wandering outside the cleared lanes or advancing before the flails completed their work. The machines had functioned remarkably well under combat conditions that peacetime testing could never replicate. Individual Crab crews had a clear understanding of the reality behind the statistics. Corporal Robert Davies of the 22nd Dragoons spent 4 hours methodically flailing through Gold Beach's defenses, his tank detonating an estimated 47 mines without suffering disabling damage. His account described the peculiar rhythm of mine clearance under fire, maintain steady speed, watch for obstacles that might foul the chains, ignore the German shells bursting nearby, and trust the tank's armor to protect against shrapnel and small arms fire. Davis's tank suffered 3 broken chains during the operation, requiring hasty field repairs that exposed the crew to enemy fire. They persisted because infantry lives depended on cleared lanes. By midday, Davis's Crab had created a route that 2 entire battalions used to move inland. The mathematics was simple: 1 5-man tank crew accepting risk to protect 2,000 infantrymen. The AVRE proved equally valuable, though its contribution was harder to quantify statistically. At Gold Beach's La Hamel strongpoint, a massive concrete casemate housing an 88mm gun commanded the shoreline, carefully positioned to provide interlocking fire with neighboring positions. Conventional wisdom dictated that such fortifications required prolonged bombardment by heavy naval guns or airstrikes with massive bombs. Lieutenant John Breeze commanded 3 AVIEs that advanced to point-blank range, absorb hits from German infantry weapons, and systematically demolish the position with petard rounds. The entire action lasted less than 20 minutes. Post-battle examination found the casemate's 2-meter-thick walls breached in multiple places, the interior devastated by overpressure and fragmentation. The A.T. Plymere gun crew was killed to a man. This single example, repeated across dozens of strongpoints, demonstrated that Hobart's flying dustbin could achieve in minutes what might have otherwise required hours. The crocodile flamethrowers generated the most dramatic results, though their use remained controversial even among British commanders. At Sword Beach, a company of German infantry occupying trenches and bunkers refused to surrender despite heavy bombardment. 3 crocodiles moved forward, their armored fuel trailers clanking behind them. The first gout of flame shot across 100 meters of beach, splashing liquid fire into trench systems. The psychological shock was immediate. German soldiers who had withstood artillery bombardment abandoned positions, fleeing inland or surrendering. Military historians debate the ethics of flamethrowers, noting that actual death from crocodile attacks were often lower than from conventional weapons. Defenders typically surrendered or fled rather than face immolation. The terror factor exceeded the physical destructiveness, and British commanders used crocodiles specifically against positions where they wished to minimize their own casualties and avoid prolonged fighting in built-up areas. The bobbin mat layers, perhaps the least dramatic of Hobart's vehicles, proved essential to maintaining momentum. The eastern sector of Gold Beach consisted of soft sand overlying clay, trapping vehicles within meters of the waterline. Captain James, who commanded a troop of bobbins that systematically laid coconut matting across the worst sections, creating roadways that remained passable throughout D-Day, despite thousands of vehicles crossing them. Engineers who examined the matting weeks later found it compressed and damaged, but still functional. The simple technology, essentially reinforced carpet, had solved a problem that could have created catastrophic traffic jams on a beach still under occasional German artillery fire. Hill's after-action report dryly noted that while the bombing was unglamorous, it was indispensable in preventing Gold Beach from becoming a vehicle graveyard. Medical statistics provided another measure of success. Field hospitals behind Gold and Sword Beaches treated significantly fewer traumatic amputations and blast injuries than anticipated. Doctors are prepared for overwhelming numbers of mine victims. Soldiers with legs blown off, abdominal wounds from upward blasts, the horrific injuries that characterize mine warfare. Instead, they treated primarily bullet wounds, shrapnel injuries, and the usual combat accidents. The absence of mass mine casualties stood out so starkly that several medical officers specifically mentioned it in their reports. One surgeon remarked that the preparation for the worst was not needed, thanks to Hobart's innovations. The butchery on an industrial scale was avoided, and instead, a manageable stream of wounded soldiers was the result. The flail tanks deserve more recognition than they are likely to receive. German defenders inadvertently testified to the machine's effectiveness. Interrogation report from prisoners captured on D-Day show confusion and dismay over the British assault methods. Several German officers expressed their astonishment that their meticulously prepared minefields had been neutralized so quickly. One artillery observer described watching Crabs advance through defenses that had taken German engineers weeks to lay, clearing them in minutes. Another account mentioned that initially, defending troops thought the Crabs were some kind of mine-laying vehicles and couldn't understand why British infantry walked directly behind them. The psychological impact of seeing seemingly impenetrable defenses bypassed by unfamiliar machines played a significant role in the collapse of German morale in several sectors. The Normandy success validated Hobart's vision, but he knew that D-Day was just the beginning. As the Allied forces pushed inland through the summer and autumn of 1944, the 79th Armored Division's specialized vehicles continued proving their worth. The bocage country of Normandy, with its thick hedgerows and sunken lanes, presented obstacles as challenging as the beach defenses. German troops had transformed each hedge into a fortified position, lacing them with mines and positioning anti-tank guns to control every approach. Crabs found new work clearing paths through these deadly grounds, while AVREs demolished stubborn strongpoints. The machines that critics had dismissed as one-use novelties for D-Day had become permanent fixtures of British tactical doctrine. The autumn of 1944 saw Montgomery's ill-fated Operation Market Garden, followed by prolonged battles through Belgium and Holland. Winter warfare in flooded terrain tested Hobart's vehicles in unforeseen conditions. Crabs struggled in waterlogged ground where mines might be submerged, requiring modified tactics and careful reconnaissance. AVREs found unexpected utility bridging drainage ditches and crossing partially demolished causeways. Engineers developed additional attachments and modifications based on combat experience, a process Hobart wholeheartedly supported. His division functioned not only as an operational unit but also as an experimental laboratory, continually refining techniques and equipment. By early 1945, the 79th Armored Division had become an institution. Its methods were taught at training schools, and its vehicles were requested by commanders throughout the 21st Army Group. The Rhine crossing in March 1945, Operation Plunder, presented Hobart with perhaps his greatest challenge. The Rhine was Hitler's last natural defensive barrier, heavily fortified with troops who understood that their defeat meant the invasion of Germany's heartland. Intelligence suggested massive minefield protecting the river's eastern bank, with densities far beyond what had been encountered in Normandy. The river itself was over 400 meters wide in the crossing sectors, too broad for conventional bridging operations under fire. German engineers had fortified the far bank with bunkers, trenches, and obstacles designed to obliterate any force attempting to establish a bridgehead. Montgomery's staff estimated that crossing the Rhine without specialized equipment would cost tens of thousands of casualties. Hobart's machines had performed flawlessly. Preparations began weeks ahead of time. The 79th Armored Division assembled over 500 specialized vehicles, the largest concentration yet employed. Crabs underwent intensive maintenance, their chains replaced, and mechanisms overhauled. AVRE crews practiced assault drills until they could operate in total darkness. New equipment arrived, including Churchill AVREs, armored ramp carriers that could position themselves as mobile bridges, enabling tanks to cross them. Engineers developed modified LVTs, landing vehicles tracked, capable of ferrying Crabs and even AVREs across the river. The planning complexity rivaled D-Day, with every vehicle's route, timing, and objectives mapped in exhaustive detail. Hobart personally supervised rehearsals, his exacting standards unchanged despite the victory now seeming inevitable. The assault commenced on the night of March 23, 1945, with mass artillery and aerial bombardments that dwarfed even D-Day's preparation. At first light on March 24th, specialized vehicles began crossing aboard landing craft and swimming LVTs. The reception was fierce. German troops, now fighting for their homeland, defended with desperation and skill. Crabs reached the eastern bank and immediately began flailing through minefields under direct fire from 88mm guns positioned in concrete gun placements. Several crabs were knocked out within minutes, but others pushed forward, their chains steadily cutting through the deadly terrain. Infantry following in the cleared lanes took casualties but established footholds that conventional assault methods might never have achieved. Sergeant William Shaw commanded a crab that cleared a vital path inland from the riverbank. His account described German resistance as the most intense he had ever encountered, even surpassing D-Day's ferocity. Anti-tank rounds struck his Sherman repeatedly, one even penetrating the flail mechanism and jamming the drum. Shaw's crew worked under fire to clear the jam, succeeded, and resumed flailing. Over the next 3 hours, his crab detonated an estimated 70 mines, clearing a path that an entire brigade used to advance inland. Shaw's tank finally succumbed to an 88mm hit that destroyed the engine, but by then, the mission was complete. He and his crew evacuated on foot, walking back down the lane they had cleared, passing infantry companies advancing to exploit the breakthrough. Shaw received the Distinguished Conduct Medal, though he later insisted that his crew deserved equal recognition. The AVREs faced their own challenges. The German bunkers along the Rhine were more sophisticated than those at Normandy, with multiple chambers and overlapping fields of fire. Flying dustbins proved effective but required multiple hits to neutralize each position. Lieutenant Michael Carr commanded an AVRE troop that systematically demolished a complex of 7 interconnected bunkers. The process took nearly 4 hours and resulted in 2 AVREs being damaged by return fire. Carr's after-action report noted that German defenders fought with suicidal determination, continuing to engage even as their positions crumbled around them. Only the Petard's massive charge could reliably penetrate the reinforced concrete quickly enough to prevent defenders from inflicting unacceptable casualties on attacking infantry. Within 48 hours, 21st Army Group had established a secure bridgehead across the Rhine. Casualty figures, while significant, were well below staff estimates. Post-operation analysis credited the specialized assault vehicles with enabling the crossing at an acceptable cost. German prisoners interrogated after the battle expressed surprise that British forces had crossed so quickly, despite the prepared defenses. Several mentioned the mine-clearing tank specifically, noting that their own forces had nothing comparable. The technological advantage that Hobart had championed since 1943 had proven decisive in numerous operations, fundamentally altering how modern armies approach fortified positions and obstacle belts. The war in Europe ended barely 6 weeks after the Rhine crossing, with German forces surrendering on May 8, 1945. Percy Hobart, now 60 years old, could look back on a remarkable legacy. His 79th Armored Division had participated in every major British operation from D-Day onward, with its vehicles clearing paths through obstacles that would have otherwise cost tens of thousands of lives. Post-war analysis statistics told an extraordinary story. Throughout the Northwest Europe campaign, British and Canadian forces employing Hobart specialized vehicles experienced mine-related casualties at roughly 1/10 the rate of formations lacking such equipment. The 90% reduction observed on D-Day held remarkably steady through subsequent operations, a testament to both the effectiveness of the machines and the tactical doctrines Hobart had developed for their use. Yet Hobart's contribution extended beyond casualty reduction. He had fundamentally changed military thinking about obstacles and fortifications. Before Hobart's innovations, armies viewed minefields and bunkers as obstacles requiring overwhelming force or accepting heavy losses to overcome. Hobart demonstrated that engineering creativity could neutralize these defenses more efficiently than brute force, marking a philosophical shift. Warfare need not consist solely of firepower contests. It could also incorporate technological solutions to tactical problems. This idea reached far beyond World War II. Hobart showed that modern armies needed specialized equipment and dedicated formations for assault engineering, concepts that would shape military organizations for generations. In the immediate post-war years, interest in Hobart's vehicles declined sharply. Peacetime militaries, facing budget cuts and demobilization, had little desire to maintain expensive specialized equipment. The Crabs, AVREs, and crocodiles that had proved so valuable were mothballed or scrapped. Only a handful remained in service, preserved more out of institutional inertia than strategic foresight. Hobart himself retired in 1946, his health deteriorating after years of intense stress. He spent his final years writing memoirs and corresponding with former officers, frustrated by the apparent fading of the 79th Armored Division's lessons. He died in 1957, passing just as new conflicts would once again vindicate his methods. The Suez Crisis of 1956 reminded military planners of why Hobart's inventions mattered. British forces assaulting Egyptian positions found that specialized assault equipment had deteriorated, and mine clearance reverted to manual methods, leading to unnecessary casualties. This experience prompted the reactivation of surviving Crabs and the accelerated development of new assault engineering vehicles. Throughout the Cold War, NATO forces maintained dedicated combat engineer units equipped with modern versions of Hobart's Funnies. The British Army developed the Centurion AVRE and later the Chieftain AVRE, each generation building on Hobart's original concepts while updating technology. The fundamental principle remained unchanged: mechanical solutions to obstacle problems saved lives. Modern mine clearance technology owes a direct lineage to Hobart's flails. Contemporary vehicles like the AVRE and Trojan employ rotating drums with chains or hammers, clearing mines through mechanical detonation just as a Sherman Crab did 80 years ago. Engineers have refined the technology using titanium chains, computer-controlled drum speeds, and integrated detection systems. But the core concept remains Hobart's. Similarly, modern assault-breaching vehicles trace their roots to Hobart's AVRE, which carried bridge-laying equipment, fascines, and explosive charges for destroying obstacles. The British Army's Trojan vehicle, introduced in 2006, features a Python mine clearance system, operating on principles similar to Hobart's Conga, firing explosive hoses across minefields to create cleared lanes. The Israeli Defense Forces, facing constant mine threats, became perhaps Hobart's most devoted followers. Israeli combat engineers studied British assault engineering doctrine extensively, developing their own specialized vehicles based on Hobart's principles. The Puma combat engineering vehicle, the Nakadin mine-clearing system, and various obstacle-breaching tanks all reflect design philosophies Hobart pioneered. Israeli commanders, who often faced adversaries reliant on mine warfare, recognized that mechanical clearance was the only viable alternative to accepting catastrophic casualties. Their tactical use of engineering vehicles during conflicts in Lebanon and Gaza proved that Hobart's concepts remained relevant in asymmetric warfare against irregular forces. American military doctrine, having learned hard lessons at Omaha Beach, eventually adopted Hobart's approach. The U.S. Marine Corps developed specialized assault-breaching vehicles, including the Assault Breacher vehicle introduced in 2010. This machine combines a mine plow, a linear demolition charge system, and bridge-laying capability, essentially incorporating several of Hobart's concepts into one platform. U.S. Army combat engineer battalions now train extensively in mechanical breaching operations using equipment and techniques directly descended from the 79th Armored Division's methods. The transformation from Bradley skepticism in 1944 to full institutional acceptance took decades, but Hobart's vindication was complete. Academic military historians regard Hobart as one of the most innovative British generals of the 20th century. While he remains largely unknown to the public, his contributions extend beyond specific machines to encompass a new way of thinking about military problems. Hobart proved that creativity and engineering could achieve what traditional methods could not. His unorthodox solutions, despite skepticism from conventional minds, show that technology could save soldiers' lives in ways that brute force could not. These lessons continue to resonate in contemporary debates about military innovation, acquisition processes, and the integration of new capabilities. The soldiers whose lives Hobart's machine saved rarely knew his name. They remember the Crabs that cleared paths through minefields, the AVREs that destroyed bunkers, the crocodiles that broke enemy resistance. They passed these stories down to their children and grandchildren, preserving Hobart's legacy more effectively than official histories. The measure of his success wasn't found in medals or promotions, but in the thousands of men who returned home because an irascible general refused to accept that obstacles required human sacrifice to overcome. Percy Hobart proved that one person's vision, backed by determination and political support, could change how wars were fought and dramatically reduce the human cost of combat.